If you're not sitting down, you have to answer the questions. Okay, this is the third of our 4 classes. The first one that is not taught by somebody with a doctor in front of their name. So have patience with the old historian who's just 7 years of school instead of 8 and 9 like the other people that are doing this. And then in our doctor from Bethany's case, Joel, he's probably 10 years. But anyway, the area that I'm covering today, and if I'm not talking loud enough, please just put your hand up for me, and then I'll try to get closer to the mic. And I noticed last week that was a problem whenever you didn't be a rock star. You had to eat the mic in order to be able to be heard. The covering that we're having today, in my opinion, which is not exactly what I was assigned, but close, is the period of time from 1866 to 1950. Now, I don't know why they picked this period of time to start, but I picked it because, if you'll see there, this is a watershed moment for the disciples. It was when Alexander Campbell died, and if you wanted to see his death mask that they made after he died, that's it. And it's on display at Bethany, and you're welcome to go and see it. It also is 15 years after the 1849 first General National Meeting of the church. It was called a convention or an assembly, and it was the very first one that we had, and it was controversial to even have it, as you learned a little bit last week. And the last one, you can tell me what that is, because it is a church that you should know. How many people think they know that building? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, if you just go downtown across from the library, that is First Christian Church instead of the Fundamentalist Baptists who we sold it to. It's right across from the Lutheran Church next to the library downtown. That's not our first building, but in 1875 when this congregation got going, that's the building was built in that period of time after 1875. So we're going to move on to the big 3. I'm going to give you 10 things that you were supposed to have learned already. And we'll see how many of them you know. First of all is the big 3 of the disciples' founding. Who are these guys? Stone, everybody know. Okay, who's what? How many people think they know them from the... Nobody? Okay, Barton Stone in Kentucky.
And
Thomas and Alexander Campbell. Thomas was the father who started. Boy, I thought everybody would have picked that up from the first 2 lectures, but Stone, and if you look around the building, you'll find pictures of Campbell and Stone around the walls. You never look at the pictures, but do it for once in a while. It's interesting. Okay, we're going to move on and ask you the question: why was this collection of churches, the Stone Campbell movement, started? Why did it happen? Who's got an idea? Yes, our scholar.
I'm going to blow it this time. Because of the movement of the people that were going west, it was kind of hard for them to find a organized church. So they wanted something that was a lot more simple to deliver as far as a sermon and a message. So they took off with this.
Yeah, but they were upset by something. What's this picture of?
Denomination.
That's all the different denominations. If you look close, you'll see how they think about each other. You know, you've got the Catholics who are okay with the Eastern Orthodox, but they don't like any of the Protestants. And down here in the bottom, we have the Oriental Orthodox are only okay with the Eastern Orthodox. And then up at the top, the Anglicans make fun of the Presbyterians, and so on and so forth. That's what you had on the American frontier. But there weren't very many churches. And Campbell came along and said, what? Make it simple. Everybody should be united. Why do we have all these churches? Why can't we just have a simple united church? Why can't people just be, what are we called in this church? Disciples and Christians. I have told some of my friends here that, like Carol, that we were glad to make her a Christian after she came from the Presbyterian Church. They said, well, there's something strange. We're ready for the next slide here. Wake up, slide person. The slogan that you should all know from the first time was, no creed but Christ. No book but the Bible. No law but love. Please memorize that. That's the basis for why we're here. That's who we are as a gathering of Christian churches. It's a unity around a simple confession of Christ, a unity around the Scripture, and a unity around love instead of conflict, even though I make fun of Presbyterians and Baptists and all these other people, okay? So we had this problem. Now, I give our good Dr. Brooks a C on his jokes. I'm not sure I can do any better, but we will tell you about a Crossroads churches, 4 of them, on 4 corners in South Carolina. On one corner is the Baptist church. And then in that Baptist church, they started to have an argument about whether they should have foot washing or not. So on one of the corners, you have the Baptist church. On the next corner, you have the foot washing Baptist church. And on the opposite corner, you have the left foot washing Baptist church. And on the other corner, you have the right foot washing Baptist church. See, that's no more funny than Brooks.
You want to see there, Fred?
Okay. So why did we get founded? We got founded because there were so many denominations, so many churches, and they were all arguing with each other, and we thought there should be unity, and that the way to do that was to simply focus on Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. And what is the only qualification to become part of this congregation? What's the preacher say when somebody comes up to join the church? Do you believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and do you accept him as your Lord and Savior? That's it, right? Okay. We don't tell you have to think anything else, right? Okay, so you got the widest variety of freedom and liberty of any denomination church you could go to. So you're supposed to be able to be as liberal or as conservative as you want to be. And nobody's supposed to hate you for it, because the only rule is what? Love. Okay. Okay, so there's our slogan. How did we think we would accomplish that? You're supposed to have learned this. These are things you're supposed to know already. They had a simple idea how you could do this. Make it happen. Simple idea. What would be your idea how to make all the churches one? No book but the... So what should you do? Look in the New Testament, and what would you see? How they did church in the New Testament. And if they have anything that's not in the New Testament, you don't need it, right? No book but the Bible. No creed but Christ. Okay? So we had the idea that we could reunite everybody based on the New Testament and restorationism. That's the other word you should know. Unity and restoration. Restoration was, okay, let's just restore the church the way it was in the New Testament. And what do you think that means? Well, in the New Testament, they had communion every Sunday, right? They had baptism by immersion, right? They had diversity where people had different ideas and each congregation functioned on its own, right? So those three things became the basis of why how the church could be restored and be unified into one church. Okay? Campbell didn't work because when he went out and started to give communion to all different kind of Presbyterians, he got called back to Philadelphia and suspended and said, you can't be a preacher anymore because you're giving communion to, believe it or not, there were 4 different kinds of Presbyterians. Burghers and anti-burgher Presbyterians, and Cedar and non-Cedar Presbyterians. So you had anti-burgher Presbyterian church, burghers, and burgher. Anyway, there were 4 different ones, and he was giving communion to all of them. That's a no-no, because they don't have the same little statement, creed. They don't agree on everything. So Campbell said, this is stupid. Out here in the West, where we only got 4 Presbyterians of this one and 3 Presbyterians of that one, we ought to be able to have one place, one church. So, been thrown out by the Presbyterians. Campbell wrote that little thing that the first guy talked about here, the Declaration and Address, our founding document, that said, hey, look, we ought to just be all Christians. And then they said, well, we ought to really try and get together with other people because we're for unity, so maybe we can be Baptists. You see what happened there? They joined the Redstone Baptist Association and they got thrown out of that group. So they tried to stay Presbyterians, that didn't work. They tried to become Baptists, that didn't work. So they finally got together with Martin W. Smith. And they shook hands in 1832. They showed you that picture of there shaking hands, put the 2 groups together and became the Christian Church and Disciples. Campbell's thought they ought to be disciples. Stone thought they ought to be Christian. Today we say Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, parentheses, to try and make everybody happy. Doesn't work, but that's what we try to do. And so that's how you get to where we are now. Campbell published a periodical. It's called the Millennial harbinger. Now, if we want to someday, we'll have a class on premillennial and postmillennialism. And I had a minister once from one of our sister denominations ask us whether you guys were premillennialists or postmillennialists. So how many amillennials? How many premillennialists do we have? How many post? See, you don't even, I told them, I said, I don't think they know what millennialists are. So, okay, that's a whole nother subject. But anyway, Campbell became really famous. He was a delegate to the Virginia Constitutional Convention. He was kind of the Billy Graham of his day. Everybody knew Alexander Campbell. He was the glue that held all these things together. And you thought, well, what happened to Barton Stone? What happened to Barton? Well, he died early, so he had less influence. Campbell lived longer, and so that's why we talk all about Alexander Campbell all the time instead of Barton, good old Barton. Okay? Okay. So then we learned last week that the movement really grew from 29 people in Bethany, West Virginia to 126,000 people in 1856. So in our little time period, you see how much growth there was. And then after the Civil War was what Dr. French talked about, was when they moved west. And we have the church right down the middle of the country. And so we're right on those central states. And that's still where you're going to find most of the disciple churches. The most being probably Texas and Oklahoma. Okay. About this time, too, we said, hey, look, we ought to be educated, because disciples had the notion that faith ought to be reasonable. We're talking about the period of time when America started. If you think that there's no creed and it's that simple creed, what do you have to do? You have to be smart enough to do what? Decide what you believe, instead of listening to Dr. Brooks. Well, I'm sort of serious here, that you know churches where what you believe is determined by what the minister tells you to believe, right?
Yes, that's true. Personality.
That's not us. You're supposed to be smart enough and educated enough and reasonable enough to figure it out, even if you're wrong, like some of you are. Anyway, moving on to what you're supposed to have known already, the church organization beyond that was about mission, because everybody agreed that evangelism was essential. Is very important. How many people here have evangelized anybody in the last month? 1, 2. You see, you don't think, you need to start thinking that that's important. I tried to tell you that years ago when I was your minister, but you didn't listen to me either. So consequently, they all agreed on the fact that evangelism was what you should do, and working together. Foreign missions became a very important thing to try and do, and this was true for all churches, all denominations, and because that's when the foreign mission movement started. Okay? Last but not least, we touched on the issue of slavery last week, and the issue of slavery did not divide the disciples. Now, why do you think that would be? What?
Non-essential?
Not, it was not something that you could tell people what to think about. If you believe in Jesus Christ, that's all that's required. So there are a variety of disciple opinions on that. And the Bible people would tell you, I happen to agree with them, that the Bible tells you slavery is okay. Racism is not okay, but slavery is okay. And if there's some of you who would like to volunteer, I have yard work to do. And we would be happy for you to be slaves again. But that was a dividing point. Some disciples were abolitionists and some weren't. Campbell himself was very confused about it. He ended up freeing his slaves, but he was somewhat confused. Wasn't a given. Okay, that's what you're supposed to have known. I'm not sure you did, but hopefully you do now. Right? Okay. So, we're ready to know. This is when you're supposed to learn something new. You okay? And I'm not too far behind schedule even. Okay. The watershed moment, I told you, was the death of Alexander Campbell. There he is when he was that age, 1865. That's his gravestone at God's Acre in Bethany. And there's the assembly of the Christian church in Indianapolis, or in Cincinnati in 1848. That's what Cincinnati looked like in 1848. That's the watershed point for when we move from a unity to here's the leaders at that time. I forgot where it was in the slides. These are names that you don't know, but if you want to know something about what happened during this period of history, these are the guys. And they were all editors of these magazines. The Christian Century, that some of you know, was originally The Christian. It was our magazine, the Disciple magazine. The Christian Standard was a message for one of our cousins, because we had the saying that we don't have bishops to tell us, we have editors. So I look at it as kind of like CNN and Fox. You know, that's where people got their information. If you got one magazine you thought one way, you got another magazine you thought another way. And the editors of the magazines, those guys that I just had up there, were really influential in determining what people in the churches thought. Because they're supposed to read the magazine and figure it out, you know, reason and all that. Now, we did have one guy that you probably do know right here. You know who he is? Oh, I told you. It's right there. Anybody not get that? James Garfield. He's the only person who was ever a minister and a president.
Yeah, look what happened to him.
And he got killed about 6 months in. He had been a general in the Union Army, an abolitionist, and he got killed because of what? Anybody know? Yes.
People didn't agree with that?
They didn't agree with him, that's right. They didn't agree with him with something called the spoils system. Anybody know what the history majors? What's the spoils system?
When you got elected, you put all your own people in there.
When you got elected,
And fired everyone else that was there before.
and fired everybody else who was there before that didn't agree with you. And we're not making any political comments right now. This is a church that accepts people on both sides. The rule of law of love, remember? Okay. But that's the idea. It was the beginning of the Civil Service Commission, And there was a guy who campaigned for Garfield who thought I should have a job, didn't get one, shot the guy. Now, he didn't die right away. The doctors killed him. 6 months after he was shot, with about 20 different doctors sticking their fingers in him because they didn't know anything about medicine much, and he died of infection. But, so we don't have much of a record. Now, I put up here the brand new, last year, biography of Garfield. Yeah, if you want to, anybody's crazy enough like me to read historical biographies. Okay, now, we also thought ministers ought to be educated, right? Dr. French suggested that ministers ought to be educated last week. So what do you think we did? We already had those colleges. We started to found seminaries. These are our disciple schools. Now, 2 of them are university schools that are connected to a university, and they just have disciple houses. The other 4 were founded by disciples for disciples, although all of them train ministers from every denomination now these days. Okay, that's where we are now, and this section was called Divergence and Division, because that's what happened. We split. And if you look at that little chart that I gave you as you came in, you will see that there are 3 main branches of the Disciple Stone movement now. The disciples, the churches of Christ, not the United Church of Christ, but the churches of Christ, and the Christian Church Independent. Now, some of them have split up even more, because you'll see that the churches of Christ, some of them have split up over whether to use a common cup or not, or the little things here. Don't laugh. We had a big argument here when I was here on what color the docile curtain should be. So, be patient. Right now, in our town, you will find us, 2 other disciple churches, Beaver Creek, Downsville. You'll also find a Church of Christ. One of them is right up the road here on the left-hand side on Leitersburg Pike, and then the one on Whitehall Road, which is the major one. I think that they're ones of the splits down there, and I don't know which split is which. And then we have Ringgold Church. Y'all know that one up on the hill? Yeah. That's an independent Christian church. These are all Stone Campbell traditional churches, but they split. And so we're going to try and learn what they split for and see whether you're in the right place. First split was about what kind of structure should we have beyond the congregation. After all, if you're going to have foreign missions, right, what are you going to do? Have your own missionary from First Christian Church? Churches of Christ still do that. A congregation sponsors a ministry, congregation runs out of money, the missionary might be in Africa somewhere and doesn't even know how to get home. The Klein family, if you remember, their son was a missionary for one of those churches. He had to go out and raise his money to be a missionary. You don't have to do that. We have missionaries all over the world as disciples, and they're paid for by Disciple Mission Fund, which is part of our budget and part of our giving. and the 4 special offerings that we do every year. Okay? So, why would we not want missionary societies which would work together to pay for congregations? Well, there's the split. Because the Bible doesn't say anything about what? Working beyond a local congregation. So anything beyond the congregation is off the table. Don't have it. Because where the scriptures speak, another slogan, what? Anybody know? Where the scriptures speak, we speak. Where the scriptures are silent, we are silent. So if it's not there and tells you to do it, you can't do it. Disciples have said, no. You use your reason and necessary, it's called necessary inference. In other words, if it ain't there and they don't say you can't do it, well, use your reason and decide whether you ought to do it or not. Churches of Christ do not have organizations beyond the congregation that have any authority over the congregation whatsoever. Okay? Next big fight was over organs. Now, why would you fight over organs? Well, the main reason you fought over organs was because they were now affordable. Anybody old enough that you've seen or played a pump organ? Little small instrument. You can go, we had one of those in my first church in Rochester, Kentucky. Nobody knew how to play it, but it was there. And they fought over whether a lady in the church wanted to take it into her home and then give it back to the church. And they had a big fight over whether she should be allowed to do it or not. It's fascinating. Anyway, organs are what? Are they in the New Testament? No way. Even pipe organs didn't come around till the 1400s. But what happened now, right after the Civil War in 1860s? They became small and cheap and portable. So you could buy one and put it in your church. You think that caused some problems? That's change. We don't like change, right? And they said, shouldn't be there. Why? It's not in the New Testament. So we don't have it. And so if you go to a Church of Christ today, what are you going to find? A cappella singing only. No organ, no instrumental music. But now they're actually in some churches of Christ, they're starting to fight about it again because they have people that are younger in the congregation that want to have a band. You know that argument, right? So, therefore, I don't know where they are these days, but what they do have choir. And where do you think the choir sits? In the congregation with all separated around, some here, some there, with a microphone.
They have microphones?
And I don't know why they have microphones, but they could sing, and it's absolutely spectacular. If you've never been to a large Church of Christ where they're singing, boy, they put you to shame, even though this congregation sings pretty good for churches. But Churches of Christ, all a cappella. Okay? And all because organ in the Bible. Here's their arguments. It's not really spiritual either. You spend too much time looking at the notes and not listening to the words. And I know that's true of some of you because you don't, you just sing along and you don't pay attention to the words, right? Guilty sometimes? Yeah. Why do we sing all verses of the hymns? Why do musicians think we should? Because the hymn is telling a story, and it's important to know the words, so if you just sing the first and the fourth verse, you miss the point. I don't know. You have this experience because our music minister at times, what's he do in the middle of a hymn? Stops playing, and you have to sing a cappella. Is that pretty? Yes, sir. Not all, anyway, these are the arguments about it. And believe it or not, these things cause a split in the church. Okay, next. Disciples say, New Testament doesn't say, we already covered that pretty much. So, much to some of your discouragement, you can actually have a guitar if you want it. Disciple church. Okay, next. And by the way, if you go to Church of Christ, heck with that orchestra thing, let's get rid of it. Remember our Sunday school orchestra? That was a major feature of this congregation back in the 1920s. Okay, a biggie. Historical criticism of the Bible. In the 1870s, there's a movement coming out of Germany that says, instead of just reading the Bible and pretending that it didn't have a historical content, that it's obvious what it means for you today, and you don't need any books or anything else to tell you about what happened around it. You don't need to worry about whether it's whether the text is based on something that goes back to the Jesus time. We don't have any of those, and so they argue about it. There's two kinds of criticism. Lower criticism, which is trying to determine what is the real text. How do you think you'd decide what the real text is if you were in charge here? What's a logical way to decide?
Go back to the original text.
If you don't have original copy of Paul's letter, you look for the earliest copy of the material. Now, I had a lady in my first church in Rochester who told me one Sunday, because I used to read out of the RSV, she says, you should bring out the King James Bible. The King James Bible was good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me. What is higher criticism? Higher criticism is something you get when we come to Sunday school here, because people ask you questions, and they ask you things like, what did the text mean to the people who read it or heard it? How reliable are the sources? What are the motivations and biases of the people who wrote it? Those are all questions that what kind of people ask when they're doing research. Historians. So historical criticism, higher criticism, is trying to look at the text to see what you can learn by using the tools of the historian, and not just assuming that the words are there, all I do is read them, and I'll understand what they mean for me in my life. Okay? Churches of Christ people, those names I put you on the beginning, Lipscomb and Fanning, Arendt and Garrison, and this is the origin of the period of time when some churches started talking about the inerrancy of Scripture. In other words, every word is got to be true, exactly the way it was written. That's what inerrant means, no mistakes. So if there's a contradiction in Scripture, you have to figure out how to put them together. For example, what does Acts say about how Judas died? He was hanging on a branch, hung himself on a branch, and broke and it fell and his... How does Matthew say that he died? Look it up, folks. The only way you can explain it is he got killed and then he hung himself and then he fell. I mean, it's crazy. Another big argument was how many people think rabbits are ruminants? In other words, they chew cud like a cow. No, biologists, people? No, rabbits are not ruminants according to scientists. Bible says they are. Why? They go. So they thought they must be ruminants. Okay, that's higher criticism, guys. And it's an argument over how to interpret, how to understand what tools are legitimate to use and what aren't. And whether you should just read the Bible and assume everything is there. And that means women, stop talking in church, you people. You can't have a role around here. Fourth thing that they argued about was all the social issues. And the Churches of Christ would say, none of this is important. Not important to the church. Why is it not important? Because you're about evangelism. We're about spiritual life. The church shouldn't, you've heard this from somebody, haven't you? The church shouldn't talk about social justice. They shouldn't have opinion about anything or state anything about anything, because the church is about spiritual things. People that are thinking about this are just interested in themselves and the material things. So they wouldn't worry about the poor or the role of women or the problems of urban youth. Disciples would have been a big supporter of a movement that started during this period called the YMCA. And we don't need the village people to tell us it used to mean Young Men's Christian Association. Started out to, how do we solve the problem of urban youth? Okay. Church of Christ would say, not a problem. Or that I have anything to say about. Okay. So, the Lord didn't equip the church to conduct reform movements, so forget about those things. We're about converting individuals. We don't need to worry about the society. Local churches, Christians work spreading the gospel. That's all you have to do. So, straighten up, fly right. Disciples of Christ, however, today would say, and we're involved in social issues. We're very involved in the women's right to vote. Well, obviously didn't get all these things right, but we're very, very involved in the abolition movement of slavery, abolition of slavery. We're still involved in National Benevolent Association. We started Christian homes and orphanages and all of this kind of stuff. Anybody know Carrie Nation? Few. Yeah, disciple minister's wife. Took her hatchet, went into the bars, and chopped up the bar. Her hyperactive hatchet was trying to oppose the use of alcohol. We already talked about letting women be ministers. Clara Babcock, boy, talk about real mistake. No.
We'll talk after.
Okay, so my summary for you of Churches of Christ. If you look, one way you could divide them is how many people say y'all. Why would that be? because churches of Christ tend to be in the South. You get much further north than here, you aren't going to find very many. You go to Texas, they're going to be on every corner. Every place you turn around, there's going to be a Church of Christ. Rural and urban. Urban churches tended to be disciples. Rural churches tend to be Church of Christ. I mean, these aren't absolutely true. Disciple ministers tended to be more progressive and less fundamental because of that historical criticism. Although we have our share of fundamentalist disciple ministers and people. See, because remember, it's okay to believe in Jesus Christ and be wrong about some things. Okay? Disciples tend to have college-educated members and ministers. Now, historians could argue about that, but those are summary things. Okay? Who do we have? The oldest church, Beaver Creek, 1833. I mean, it was one of the earliest churches for disciples. Then Downsville in 68, and us not until 1875. And since then, you guys have been lazy. And my church in Toledo, at least, had founded one other disciple congregation. So I failed you. Dr. Brooks founded a disciple congregation, so he's ahead of the game. He's also on the committee to try and see if the region can help start another disciple congregation. Now, by 1909, we were a pretty big operation, the centennial, the 100th anniversary. We had our assembly in Pittsburgh, and we filled Forbes Field. There's amazing pictures of the disciple assembly of 1909 with filling Forbes Field. Did that end the splitting? I wish, but no. We split again. We're going to split this time between the Church of Christ, Christian, Independent, and Disciples. See us on the right in these is where I'm going to show these all the way through. And on the left is the Ringgold and what they call the North American Christian Convention. And the independent church is kind of halfway in between disciples and churches of Christ. But you're going to have to decide, according, the person who asked me the millennials question is the minister from Ringgold. He wanted to know which you were, millennialist, premillennialist, or postmillennialist. You might want to look that up and find out what you think. These were the issues: open membership, council churches, responsibilities for ordination, and the formation of the United Christian Missionary Society. Okay. Who could be a member of a local congregation? That's the argument about open membership. How many people in this room have been baptized by immersion? How many people have not been baptized by immersion? You guys are out.
Hey, what about pouring? That's in the New Testament.
Yeah. Well, I will almost get to that. But open membership with churches like this one, who have been open membership since 1930s, as best as I can tell. Although I can't guarantee that, but it seems like that's about when it happened. But I don't think they ever voted on it. I think Norman just started to let people in who hadn't been immersed, but I'm not sure of that. That'd be a good question for somebody to study. But The Churches of Christ, or the Independent Christian Church, says no, no, no. The Bible says you by immersion, you got to be immersed. Yes.
What is that response to the thief on the cross who Christ said, tonight you'll be with me in paradise? And he wasn't.
Don't you think that Jesus had the ability to give special treatment to somebody? I mean, it's kind of like being the associate principal. Some people you put in punishment and some people you don't, you know. So.
Wait a minute.
Okay. I'm going to keep going or I'm not going to get done. These are, the independent people says you can't be ordained a person to be a minister who feels called. So if you just feel called, a local congregation can ordain you and say, okay, you're a preacher, you're a minister. For disciples, you have to have a number of things happen. You have to have a vote of the congregation. You know, you've done that a couple of times lately. I think we even let TJ in, who knows. You have to have a degree from an accredited seminary. You have to complete a psychological exam. And you have to have boundary training. Boundary training is where they tell you that you can't go out with somebody in your church if you're not married and they're not married. One of you has to quit the church because you're overstepping the boundary. And when I hug, and I'm sure that some of you have noticed that when I hug a woman, I try to do it the right way. It's called the A-frame hug. So I don't make any chest-to-chest contact with you. Okay, so disciples have disciples have criteria for ministry. The independent churches and the Churches of Christ, it's totally up to the local congregation to decide whether somebody should be ordained or not. Now we do have, as you will well know, we do have some special exceptions, like you can be, I'm getting old, commissioned minister. You have to go through lesser requirements, and you have to have a job in a local congregation in order to be commissioned. That's a fairly new development. How do you respond to the ecumenical movement? Well, churches independent say, wait a minute, we're going to look like a denominational church. We're going to look like a denomination. Can't do that. So you don't cooperate with anybody else. You don't work with them sinful Methodist people or whatever. One of the leaders of the ecumenical branch for the disciple, Peter Ainsley, anybody know that name? Right down here at Christian Temple, Christian Church in Baltimore, major leader, was actually the founder of the Council of Christian Unity in the Disciples organization. Then you relate to the National Council of Churches, the World Council of Churches, the Federal Council of Churches, even if you don't like what they do or some of the things they say. We try to find common ground with them. So that's be a difference between us. The big one of the big things at the time was the founding of the Christian Missionary Society, because we had 5 different missionary societies, and they united them all together in one and put all these other organizations that the church had beyond the congregation under one umbrella called the Christian Missionary Society. And next week, Dr. Brooks is going to tell you a little bit about what happened to become what we called restructure. Okay, all those organizations there on the bottom we have a Hispanic organization, a black organization, We have a pension fund. Don't have any of those things, independent church. They're separate and independent. Okay. So, I don't know that our speaker, Joel Brown, I think he wouldn't agree, because he really thinks that restorationism can be saved. I'm not sure that I do. I see unity and restoration as in conflict. We tried it. Tried to get the Methodists and Presbyterians to see it our way. Didn't work. And so disciples decided, okay, let's see how we can work together. Let's see how we can be in unity. And the second big issue is how to respond to cultural change. What happens? Disciples respond to change somewhat. Churches, independent Christian churches, tend not to. Tend to do it the way they've done before. Here's this little that I give you, and on the back of it is the self-described lists of the 3 different branches of the church. All is not lost. There is an organization that we started called the Stone Campbell Dialogue. These are our representatives right now to it, and the Church of Christ and Christian Church are trying to find ways in which we can be one and work together. So I would say that if you don't like where you are, here's the things you're going to lose if you go out to Ringgold. You won't have a camp. You won't have women clergy. You might like that, I don't know. You won't be talking to other church denominations trying to figure out what can do together. You won't have HARC. None of those. I mean, Church of Christ minister is not involved in HARC, is he? No. Yeah. You won't have a General Assembly, might be good. You won't have any organizations to work with community that you have. Those are all things that emerge from our basic understanding of who we are as Christian Church disciples. Skip down to the last one. Next week, we're going to find out where to go from here. Dr. Brooks is going to lead us. Hopefully he has all the answers. Thank you.